Silence. Out here, silence isn't just the absence of noise. It's a wait. It's the sound of 1,000 miles of dust and the ghosts of everyone who didn't make it across. Most men spend their lives trying to outrun that silence. They use whiskey. They use a deck of cards. Some use the roar of a Colt .45. Before we ride out into the dust of Silas Vance's ranch, I want to ask you a favor. These stories, real stories, rough stories, they only live as long as there are people willing to listen. If you find yourself leaning in, if you feel the heat of this Wyoming sun, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Join our circle around the fire. It helps us keep the history of the Old West alive, one soul at a time. Now, take a deep breath. Pour yourself a cup of something strong. Let's head down to the creek. But Silas Vance was different. He lived in the silence. He built a house out of it on a patch of Wyoming dirt that the sun had forgotten to bless. He didn't ask for much. A roof that didn't leak, a horse that didn't quit, and a past that stayed buried deep enough that it didn't keep him awake past midnight. He thought he was done with the world. He thought the world was done with him. But the West has a way of finding the men who want to be forgotten. It waits until you finally found a moment of peace, and then it drops a choice at your doorstep, a choice that will either save your soul or burn everything you've built to the ground. Today's story is about that choice. It's about a man who had nothing left. Then he saw the white. A woman was stumbling through the sagebrush. She wasn't walking so much as she was vibrating with the effort of not falling down. She was wearing a wedding dress that had been dragged through every bramble and briar between here and the Colorado border. The silk was shredded. The hem was stained with the red clay of the foothills. And the bodice was dark with something that wasn't clay. Silas didn't move. Not at first. He'd seen plenty of death in the war, and he'd seen even more in the years after. Usually, when something that looked like a ghost came walking out of the heat, it was best to let it pass. But then she collapsed. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out. She just folded, like a bird with a broken wing. Silas dropped the wrench. He didn't think about his knees or the ache in his back, or the fact that he hadn't spoken to a living soul in 3 weeks. Hush now, Silas said, his voice a low rumble. I'm just a rancher, and you're just a guest. No one's going to hurt you here. He picked her up. She was light, too light, like she was made of nothing but bird bones and bad memories. He carried her back to the cabin, past the horse that watched with dark, knowing eyes, and into the cool shade of the timber walls. He laid her on the cot by the hearth. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask where she came from. He just went to the stove. He did what men like him do when the world gets too loud. He made coffee. He boiled water. He tore up a clean linen shirt, the only one he had left without a hole in it. For the next 3 hours, he worked in silence. He cleaned the deep cuts on her feet. He used a bit of hooch to sanitize the gash on her arm. Every time he moved toward her, she would whisper those same words. Be gentle. Silas would just nod. Gentle as a lamb, ma'am. I promise. By evening, the fever took her. She tossed and turned on the narrow cot, muttering names he didn't recognize. Arthur, the judge, the big house. Silas sat in his rocking chair by the door, his shotgun across his lap. He didn't sleep. He watched the moon climb over the ridge and listened to her breathe. The next morning, the sun broke over the plains, and she finally sat up. She looked around the cabin, her eyes darting like a trapped fox. Where am I? She asked. Bitter Creek, Silas said. He was sitting at the table, whittling a piece of cedar. My name is Silas Vance. You're in my house. She looked at her hands, wrapped in clean bandages. She looked at the bowl of salt pork and beans sitting on the table. Why did you help me? Silas didn't look up from his wood. The wind didn't want you. Neither did the dirt. Figured I'd take a turn. She went to speak, but her throat caught. She just nodded. Her name, she eventually told him, was Clara. She hadn't been a bride. Not really. She had been. Silas listened. He didn't flinch. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He just kept whittling until the cedar was a smooth, perfect point. He'll come for me, Clara whispered. He says I'm his property. He says the law is on his side. Silas looked at the shotgun leaning against the wall. The law stops at the edge of my fence line, Clara. Out here, the only thing that matters is who's standing when the dust settles. For days passed, for days of quiet. Clara started to move better. She helped Silas in the garden. She didn't talk much, but she watched him. She watched the way he treated his horses. She watched the way he never raised his voice, even when the pump broke again or the wind knocked over the woodpile. One evening, they were sitting on the porch. The sky was a bruised orange. "Silas," she asked. "Yeah. You ever been married?" Silas paused. He looked out toward the small cluster of trees 100 yards from the house. There was a stone there, small, unmarked. "Once," he said. "Long time ago. Before the war." "What happened?" "The West happened," Silas replied. "It takes what it wants. Sometimes it takes the best of us, so the rest of us have to learn how to live without a heart." Clara reached out. Her hand was still bandaged, but she touched his calloused arm. "I think you found yours again, Silas Vance." Silas didn't answer. He couldn't. "If you're still here with us, listening to the wind on Bitter Creek, take a second. Tell me in the comments. Where are you listening from? What time is it where you are? Are you sitting on a porch like Silas? Or are you deep in the city, dreaming of the open range? And if you haven't already, now's the time to hit that like button. It lets us know you want more stories like this. Because the quiet on the Vance ranch wasn't going to last. On the 5th day, the dust appeared on the horizon, not the swirling, aimless dust of the wind, the steady, rising dust of 3 riders. Silas saw them from a barn. He didn't panic. He walked to the house, his boots steady on the dry earth. "Clara," he said, "go to the cellar. Now!" She saw the riders. Her face went white. "It's him. Silas, please." "The cellar, Clara. Don't come out until I call you, no matter what you hear." He waited until the heavy oak door clicked shut. Then he went to the porch. He didn't take the shotgun. Not yet. He took his rocking chair. He sat down and waited. The 3 men rode up to the gate. 2 of them were hired guns, the kind of men who sold their conscience for $20 a month and a hot meal. They had the look of wolves. Lean, hungry, and mean. The man in the middle was different. He wore a black suit that cost more than Silas's whole ranch. His mustache was waxed. His eyes were like 2 pieces of cold flint. This was Elias Thorne, the judge. He didn't get off his horse. He just stared at Silas. "You're on private property, stranger," Silas said, his voice as dry as the sagebrush. "I'm looking for something that belongs to me," Thorne said. His voice was educated, sharp, and arrogant. "A woman. Wanted off a few days ago. She's not right in the head. I believe she's hiding in your house." "Don't have any women here," Silas said. "Just me and the ghosts." Thorne smirked. "I see the smoke from your stove. Old man, I see the extra plate through the window. Now, you can step aside and let my men fetch her, or we can make this a legal matter. And I assure you, you won't like my version of the law." Silas stood up. He was a head shorter than the men on the horses, but he looked like he was rooted into the center of the earth. "I've seen your kind of law before," Silas said. "It's the kind that hides behind a badge and a book while it beats on things smaller than itself. I spent 4 years." Silas didn't draw a pistol. He reached behind a rocking chair and pulled the 1860 Spencer carbine he'd had hidden there. Crack! The bullet took the hired gun in the shoulder, knocking him clean off his horse. The second rider went for his gun, but Silas had already cycled the lever. "The next one goes between your eyes," Silas roared. The second rider froze. His hand hovered over his belt, trembling. Thorne screamed in rage. "You're a dead man. Do you hear me? I'll have the marshal here by sundown. I'll have you hanging from that tree." "Then you better get riding," Silas said, the rifle held steady against his cheek. "Because if you're still on my land by the time I count to 3, I'm going to see if that fancy suit can stop a .52 caliber slug." 1. Thorne looked at his fallen man, groaning in the dirt. He looked at Silas's eyes that had seen the devil, and walked away. 2. Thorne yanked his horse's head around. "This isn't over." He spurred his horse, and the second rider followed, dragging the wounded man onto his own saddle as they fled back toward the horizon. Silas didn't lower the rifle until the dust settled. Then his shoulders slumped. He leaned against the porch post, his breath coming in ragged hitches. He went to the cellar door and opened it. Clara was huddled in the corner, her hands over her ears. When she saw him, she didn't ask if they were gone. She just looked at him. "They'll be back, won't they?" Silas reached down and took her hand. "Maybe, but they'll have to come through me. And Clara, I'm a very hard man to get through." That night, they didn't sit on the porch. Silas packed a bag. He saddled the horses. "Where are we going?" Clara asked. "North," Silas said. "To the mountains. I've got an old friend in Montana. A man who doesn't care about city judges or marriage papers. We'll find a place where the wind doesn't carry his name." As they rode away from the small cabin, Clara looked back. The only home she'd ever known that didn't feel like a prison was disappearing into the moonlight. "Silas," she whispered. "Yeah. Why did you do it? You could have stayed. You could have lived your life in peace." Silas looked at the woman beside him. He looked at the way she held the reins, not with fear anymore, but with a quiet, growing strength. He thought about those first words she'd said to him. "Be gentle." "Peace is a fine thing, Clara," Silas said, "but it ain't worth much if you have to step over a broken soul to keep it. I'd rather be a man on the run than a man who forgot how to be human." They rode into the night, two shadows against a vast, uncaring world. The road ahead was long. There would be more riders, more dust, more choices. But for the first time in 10 years, Silas Vance wasn't riding away from his past. He was riding toward a future. And as the sun began to peek over the eastern ridges, painting the Wyoming grass in shades of golden fire, Clara leaned over and squeezed his hand. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. She just smiled. And it was the gentlest thing Silas had ever seen. The West is full of stories about men with fast guns and legends written in blood. But the stories that really matter? They're the ones written in the quiet moments. The ones about the people who decided that kindness was worth more than safety. Silas and Clara disappeared into the Montana timber, and as far as the law was concerned, they were never heard from again. But some folks say that if you travel